From Stuck to Scale, Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses, your guide to navigating growth, transformation, and success in today's ever-changing business landscape. Each week, we'll dive into proven strategies, real-world case studies, and actionable insights designed to help small and mid-sized business owners scale smart, lead stronger, and grow faster. Let's get you unstuck and on the path to sustainable, scalable success. Now your host, Julio Gonzalez.
Welcome back to From Stuck to Scaled, Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses. I'm your host, Julio Gonzalez, and every week we explore practical strategies, leadership insights, and real-world tools to help small and mid-sized businesses break through barriers and grow with confidence. Today, we're diving into how Gen Zers look at leadership. What are their expectations? How do they lead? One of the biggest differences to prior generations is that Gen Z is the first true digital native. We'll get into that in a bit, so let's get started. Our guest today is Alexis Bolaños. I met Alexis in the Leadership 48 class at the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, and she's my co-chair in our community project where she has stood out as a natural leader. Alexis is a rising leader who blends purpose, passion, and a deep commitment to community. Born and raised in Miami, Florida, and proud to be a first-generation Cuban American, Alexis brings a vibrant energy to everything she does, from cheering on her favorite teams to exploring new cuisines around the globe. Since earning her bachelor's degree in 2023, Alexis has taken on a dynamic role in her family's education management business, serving as the head of alumni relations at Avant-Garde Academy here in Hollywood, a K-12 charter school. There, she wears many hats, leading alumni engagement, coordinating impactful events, and keeping the operational wheels turning behind the scenes. Her mission? To build strong relationships, elevate school pride, and continue growing as a thoughtful service leader. So, Alexis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Julio, so much for having me.
So, let's start with, the most recent stuff, and that's, the Hollywood Chamber Leadership 48 program. How did you get into Leadership 48?
So my mom actually did leadership Broward years and years ago and thought that it would be a really good stepping stone for me to kind of come out as a leader. I've never actually led a team before or anyone. I'm still very early in my career. So it has been really, really challenging and kind of good for my self-reflection to join into that program. But my mom just recommended it and went from there. Probably one of the best things that I've done so far.
Well, and like I said in the intro, you've definitely done a fantastic job. You've definitely stood out. We've talked about this before.
Thank you.
I think you've done an amazing job. What are your thoughts on this experience?
So I'm sure you've also noticed I am the youngest in our leadership class. So I feel like there's a big difference in like leadership styles for me personally and my generation. Everybody works differently now. So it's really cool seeing everyone's perspective, especially with people working in different sectors. And we have people working in radio, in business consulting, in education, in hospitality. So I think it's really cool seeing leaders in different sectors. It's shown me a lot.
And what do you see as the differences between your generation and my generation?
I was actually talking to my parents about this earlier. I think that some people would say it's work ethic, but I think it's just that we prioritize different things, I guess. I think my generation is more collaborative in that we want to work together. And me personally, I like short goals, small goals that the bigger one, instead of like, oh, this is the end goal. Let's figure out how to get there. I kind of like the small steps. And I think that older generations are used to kind of just like going through the motions and then you get there eventually. I'm not like that. I need everything planned out to the hour.
It's funny because, my background's IT, and
Mhm.
there's a whole new development method that's been around for a couple of years, and it's very similar to what you're describing. In the old days, it was one giant project, and now the way you handle it is little tiny bits at a time.
Mhm.
Because if not, you go through a 6 month or a year project, and then all of a sudden, what you were trying to do doesn't work. We're doing these smaller goals, gets you immediate. I mean, I hate to say it gets you immediate satisfaction, but it gets you immediate satisfaction.
Yeah, I was gonna say instant gratification. I feel like I work best and feel most accomplished when I can like start and finish something. Because if it drags on, it almost feels like what's the point anymore? You don't ever feel the why, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and our entire society has shifted, to those smaller goals. Again, I hate to bring it down to instant gratification, because it's not just about instant gratification, but it's seeing the fruits of your labor,
Yeah.
more quickly.
Mhm.
There's a concept of, fail fast. So if something's not working, you're better off figuring it out now versus 6 months down the line. Is that instant gratification, or is that working smarter? So I think your generation, is doing it the right way. And it causes some distress in my generation, because we've been around longer, and we're accustomed to doing things, the way that we like it. But there's nothing wrong with the way that your generation is doing things.
I completely agree. I think that the older generations also see us as kind of like that we have the easy way out, especially with the boom of technology. I grew up with it essentially. So going through life with it has its perks, absolutely, but it also has a lot of huge cons. There's an oversaturation of information everywhere. You don't know what's true, what's not. There's too much data. So sometimes it's like you can't make a decision based off something that you see because there's a million researches that may not even be true.
Yeah, and you heard me say it in the intro. You guys are the first true digital natives. You grew up with all technology. The newspaper is not a thing that you guys, pay attention to. It's like, what's a newspaper? Um, so it's a whole shift, and I think you're about the same age as my kids. So well, actually, no, you're a little bit younger because I know your age. Um, uh, but my kids grew up, right at that tail end of the analog world. So I remember my daughter being, 3, 4 years old already, playing games on my computer. Right when the internet was getting started, and when you came around, it was pure internet.
Huge boom. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got a whole different perspective on everything, which is
Mhm.
I think great. Um, you have a bit of a benefit, working in the family business, and at the same time, a little bit of a challenge because, have you worked in any other businesses? I guess I should ask the question.
I have. I actually fought the idea of my family business for a while. My dad always offered it to me because, I mean, a lot of people came to the United States, like my parents, and became entrepreneurs, opened businesses. So I feel like their greatest is to have it passed down. But I definitely fought it. I wanted something of my own, and I felt like maybe, I don't know, almost like imposter syndrome, which I still feel to this day, that you haven't earned it, I guess. Um, it's easy for people to assume that. But from my perception, if you are earning the respect, you're building trust, and you're proving your value, I think it's more critical than when your last name is on the door.
Yeah, there is always that risk of, the nepotism, right?
Yes, and which
Oh,
is also very
just
big in my generation.
yeah, just because, she's the owner's daughter. So, in your case at least, and I have seen this, with a lot of Gen Z, and I think you guys get a bad rap. But I see you specifically working very hard, to earn your place and not just, because, mom and dad asked you to come into the business. Do you see that same type of, behavior and thought pattern, in other people, around you in your same generation?
Actually, absolutely. I have one of my other friends is also in the family business. Same thing, first generation Cuban American. They built their business up for 30 years and now he's a part of it. And I do see that we have to work harder at times. I know it doesn't seem that way because everyone thinks it's very easy, but you have to prove that you're not just there for the name. And I think that the work ethic is, I don't want to say better, but we work harder in a smaller time frame, if that makes sense. I feel like we're very efficient
Yeah.
with the way that we work. Other generations are used to having to work all day, all night, and having the same outcome maybe. But I feel like because of technology, and I think just because of what we've learned from our parents, from other generations, we've figured out how to make it more efficient.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with somebody today, about, foundational, um, upbringing. You know, for those of us that were raised in, um, I'll say, highly responsible, households. Our parents instilled in us those foundational principles of the work ethic and, responsibility to your work and stuff. And, I think that has a lot to do with it also. Um, the immigrant, plight is, also plays into that in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, because many immigrants that come to the U.S., want to truly, build, a life for themselves, and they recognize that they need to work, a lot harder. So there's a lot at play in here. Um, but as I mentioned, Gen Z gets a bad rap, just as a blanket, um, and some of it, is deserved, and a lot of it isn't. Um, and I think that my generation needs to be a lot more receptive, to how your generation, works and manages, and so forth. So what have you seen, in terms of anyone that you may have worked with, in more, my type of generation, that you would recommend to them? Hey, look at something, look in a different manner. What do you what's your experience there been?
I think my generation definitely prioritizes authenticity and really loving what you're doing. I feel like it wasn't as common maybe in your generation to do a job that you really love. And I think a lot of my generation, they're there because they want to be there and they want to do it. And sometimes you can feel the energy when someone doesn't want to be there, but they're doing it anyway, to get paid or whatever. And I'm not saying that my generation doesn't have that because they definitely do. But make your energy match what you're trying to portray, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve something. There's a why you're here, why you're doing what you're doing, why you want to succeed. And whether or not it's for the common good of the company or whatever it is, you're on the same side. And I think at the end of the day, matching the energy and doing everything 110%. Because when both of you are matching energy, then I think everything works more smoothly.
Yeah, and I think very much so that, starting from the boomer generation, there was the obligation to work. So, that generation, and I think less so as we've progressed, has taken a job for the pension, right? Which eventually became the 401k. And what I definitely see in your generation is that purpose. I want a job that has meaning, that has more work-life balance, and that unfortunately has started getting a bad reputation. But work-life balance is very important, and as you get older, you recognize, or at least my generation has been recognizing that. So looking to your generation, it's like, wow, they've got it right. They're thinking about it the right way. um, the boomers, and I forget what I am. I think I'm an X. Um, we work to retire and travel, where you guys work to travel and eventually retire.
Yeah, I
Because
completely agree.
too many boomers, get to retirement age. They retire from their jobs and they're too tired. Too many
You've been
aches and
working all your life.
pains. Yeah. And you guys don't hold back from traveling and getting those life experiences, which I think is huge.
What I have been saying very often lately is you're very lucky if you get to that age to retire and do all these things. There's no time to waste.
Yeah.
Even at work, you want to achieve something, do it now. Because you don't know what tomorrow is going to be like or what your job situation is going to be. Give it all you've got right now because that's what you have. That's what you can know for sure. You don't know what tomorrow is going to be. So I feel like take the trip, do what you want to do, get promoted, work towards the things that you want now instead of in 30 years. You said you're tired, you all your life, you have kids. There are things that get in the way of what you wanted to do 20 years ago. So I feel like it's important to have that balance, and it's just quality of life, I think. You want to have a balanced life between family, between your friends, between your work, feeling fulfilled in all aspects.
And I think you guys saw some of the trials and tribulations that we went through with losing that loyalty from the employer. I've been unemployed 3 times in my life, for no, never for any reason, of my own. Either the company was, having financial difficulties or whatever the case may be. But that loyalty that the company had to the employee of lifelong employment disappeared a long time ago. So my kids look at, the experiences that I've had, and, they're not going to give their employers that, total loyalty and work, crazy hours just, because they want the loyalty back, in the sense of, I'm giving you, my 40 hours, 50 hours, whatever that happens to be. But you're going to work with me. I'm not just your employee.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there has to be a mutual understanding between employers and employees. I'm surprised it took so long for people to start realizing that because my parents had similar issues. This business that they have now really started 10 years ago. It's not very, my dad is in his 70s. He's had a million jobs before this. So it's just how can we expect, like as business owners, expect people to bend over backwards? You won't do the same, or if you haven't been in that position. My mom always says, don't ever ask someone to do something you haven't done yourself.
Yep.
So I feel like we have a lot of insight from you guys, but also from our own experiences now, especially with remote working. Things are changing. Things are completely different.
And you touched on remote working, the remote work. A lot of companies are asking their employees to come back to the office, and I see that more as a me generation issue, because we don't know how to manage people remotely.
You know what? That
Even
is a
though
great point.
even though we went through COVID, we had no choice. But it's that comfort of bringing the workforce back to the office, because I can look at you,
I was
even
going to say
though
it's almost micromanaging.
it is, to an extent, it absolutely
Hmm.
is. And it's bad management, because if I had all the appropriate KPIs, knew what it was that you were doing, I shouldn't really care if it's taking you, 3 hours or 3 days to do X amount of work. I may need to determine, Alexis doesn't have enough work because she's finishing it in 3 hours, but that's on me. That's
Mhm.
not on you. And that's, I think, a huge gap that my generation's management style has, and it's going to cause more problems now that so many companies are bringing people back.
Oh yeah, I mean, COVID hit when I was in my second semester of college. So it changed the way that I think all of us functioned, but it was really interesting to me as a biology in college who was suddenly on Zoom to try to adapt to that, and then all of a sudden we're back in class, and now I have to rewire my brain again to working in person and really engaging because it's very different,
Yeah.
very, very different. So I feel like there's still a disconnect on how to properly like manage how you do that on Zoom and just to have people actually absorb and connect with information just straight from their computer. It's easy to get distracted at work, like you're in person. There's a control there.
Yeah.
You don't have that.
So what's next for Alexis?
That's a good question. I'm really looking forward. Well, it's bittersweet to the end of Leadership Hollywood. I have learned so much, and I feel like I've bloomed a little bit. It's nice to have something of my own other than my parents' business, and I feel like it'll really translate well. Um, I don't know. I'm hoping to do more things like I'm in an era of kind of absorbing as much knowledge as I can. So I'm looking to do a lot of certifications, more business style things. As I said, I was a biology major in my bachelor's, so I don't have a lot of business experience other than doing what I'm doing now. But I'd like to really expand on that. I want to absorb as much knowledge as I can, and then we'll get into everything that comes later. But right now, for me, it's like a learning experience.
Okay. So no one leaves the podcast without providing some actionable tips. So what tips do you have for your fellow Gen Z leaders and maybe even for, my generation managing Gen Z individuals?
So, to Gen Z leaders, I would say earn your seat. Just because we're young doesn't mean we don't know what we're talking about. Be confident in what you believe in. Don't forget the why. And for people leading Gen Z, I would say try to be open minded. Um, we want to be heard. And I feel like with the age right now that we're at, it's one that's overlooked very easily. So just having a seat at the table, even if it's at the end of the table, we're grateful.
Fair enough. Alexis, thank you so very much for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming to the podcast. Again, I think you're doing an amazing job, and you've got a stellar career, regardless of which direction you decide to take. So again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Julio. I was honored that you asked me. I loved it so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. So, what are your thoughts on Gen Z leaders or workers? I'll argue that they get dumped on simply because they work differently. I've worked with some great Gen Zers and found they're much more engaged and responsible than some of the responsible generations that came before them. Email me and let me know what you think at podcast@redefinepossible.co or leave a comment in whichever of the social media pages you're watching or listening to this show on. Thanks for joining me on From Stuck to Scaled, and thanks to Alexis for her insights. I'm excited to watch her leadership journey and all the great things she will surely accomplish. Growth isn't a destination, it's a journey, and every step you take brings you closer to the business and life you're building. Don't stop now. Subscribe, review, and let's keep scaling together. See you next week.
You've been listening to From Stuck to Scaled, growth strategies for small and mid-sized businesses, produced by Optocution LLC. For more information, tools, and resources, check out our website www.redefinepossible.co/podcast.